They say family gatherings bring people together. For me, it shattered every last illusion I had left. It happened at my father's birthday party a sunny afternoon in June, on the freshly mowed lawn of my parents' colonial home in Westfield. My 7-year-old daughter Ruby had been singing a little tune she'd made up, twirling in her butterfly dress, joy radiating from every note. Then my brother, Daniel, crossed the patio in 3 strides and slapped her across the face. In front of 20 relatives, my daughter fell silent mid-song, her smile collapsed, and in the suffocating hush that followed, my father chuckled and said, "She needed that. My mother." She laughed a polished, dismissive little sound like this was just another day in a well-disciplined family. I froze. Not because I was unsure of what to do, but because for a split second, I realized they thought this was normal. That Daniel, their perfect son, had simply done what they all wished someone had done to me years ago when I was Ruby's age and just as loud. But what they didn't know was that I had hidden a small camera under the garden lantern, and it had captured everything. I'm Elena Carter, a journalist, and I've spent years exposing injustice in other people's homes. What I never expected was that I'd need to do the same in my own. This is the story of how a single slap revealed decades of family abuse, how I used the truth to bring it all down, and how my daughter helped me find my voice by refusing to silence hers. Because Ruby sang, and I chose to listen. My family always had a script, and from the moment I could walk and speak, I was cast in the role of the difficult one. Growing up in the Carter household wasn't about warmth or unconditional love, it was about performance. There were roles to play and rules to follow. Daniel, my older brother, played the star. Polished, articulate, athletic, and endlessly praised. I, on the other hand, was the understudy that no one wanted on stage. I spoke too freely, cried too easily, questioned too often. You always make things harder than they need to be. Elena. My mother would sigh whenever I dared express a different opinion at the dinner table. Why can't you just let things go? I used to think it was me. That maybe if I just tried harder, spoke softer, smiled more, made myself smaller, they would love me the way they loved Daniel. But the goalposts always moved, and by the time I was 13, I stopped trying. Instead, I started writing. At first it was journal entries, then short stories, and eventually, articles in the school paper that questioned our dress code and interviewed janitors and substitute teachers the other students ignored. My voice, written down, became the only space I truly existed. When my father caught me writing a story about standardized test inequity, he scoffed. You want to be a journalist? That's not a career. That's a hobby with a byline. Daniel, meanwhile, was being groomed for real success. He shadowed my father at his firm over the summers, wore tailored suits to his college interviews, and even gave the toast at my parents' 30th anniversary party. I wasn't asked to speak. I wasn't even asked to sit at the main table. At 18, I left for college in New York on a partial scholarship and never really looked back. I majored in journalism, got internships at small papers, and slowly carved a place for myself outside the Carter bubble. I never expected support from home and I didn't get it, but I finally felt seen. Especially when I met Marcus. He was calm where I was fire, steady where I was intensity, a fellow journalist with a wry sense of humor and an unshakable belief in telling the truth. We moved in together after a year, got married at 24 and had Ruby when I was 26. Becoming a mother changed everything. Suddenly, all the small violences of my childhood, the cold dismissals, the backhanded praise, the way my voice was treated as a nuisance became crystal clear. I saw it every time Ruby sang with abandon, every time she asked why for the 100th time, every time she smiled up at me like her joy could light the world. I realized what had been stolen from me, and I vowed, silently and fiercely, that it would not be stolen from her. But life doesn't always honor vows. When Ruby was 2, Marcus was diagnosed with lymphoma. It was aggressive and cruel. We fought together hard for a year, but in the end, cancer didn't care how much we loved each other. I buried the only man who had ever told me I was enough without asking me to shrink. Grief took everything I had left. For a while, I was just surviving. Raising Ruby alone was the most joyful and exhausting thing I've ever done. I juggled freelance writing gigs, part-time editing work, and late-night copywriting contracts just to pay rent. My parents never offered real help. They sent occasional birthday cards and awkward texts, and my mother's voice on the phone was always half laced with pity, half with judgment. You know, if you had married someone a little more financially stable, you wouldn't be struggling now? Still, I let them visit. I let Daniel meet Ruby. I even brought her to Carter family Christmas 3 years ago, just after Marcus passed, thinking maybe time had softened the sharp edges of my childhood. It hadn't. My mother critiqued Ruby's wild curls. My father called her spirited, the same word he used to describe me before grounding me. Daniel offered to buy her a toy, then spent the rest of the evening talking over her. After that visit, I created distance again. Ruby was too bright, too trusting, too alive to be dimmed by those people. But then came the invitation. Dad's turning 70, my mother said over the phone. We're having a party in the garden. We'd really like you and Ruby to come. For reasons I still can't fully articulate, I said yes. Maybe it was Ruby's excitement when I told her, "Can I sing for Grandpa? I learned a song at school." Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was hope. Misplaced as always. Before I finalized our plans, I drove to my parents' house late one afternoon under the pretense of dropping off RSVPs. In reality, I was testing signal strength. I had purchased a discreet, motion-triggered camera that looked like a decorative lantern. I positioned it in a flower bed facing the patio where the party would be held. I'd started using tools like this for work discrete equipment for interviewing sources in high-risk situations or capturing evidence of misconduct in bureaucratic buildings. But this wasn't for an article. It was instinct. A journalist's reflex and a mother's premonition. Maybe some part of me knew. The day of the party, Ruby wore a dress covered in yellow butterflies and clutched a folded piece of paper with the lyrics to her song. "Do you think Grandpa will like it?" she asked as we pulled into the driveway. "He will," I said automatically. Then, after a beat, "And even if he doesn't, it's not about him. It's about you sharing something that makes you happy." She nodded seriously. "Okay. I'll sing it loud so everyone can hear," and that's exactly what she did. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have guessed, was that her voice would trigger a chain reaction that exposed not just a slap, but a sickness that had lived in our family for generations, a sickness that dressed itself up in tradition, passed itself off as discipline, and always found a way to excuse itself. It started with a single note, and it ended with everything breaking open. The morning of the party arrived with a heat wave, even by 9 a.m. The air was thick with humidity and the kind of tension I hadn't felt since walking into a courtroom as a rookie reporter to cover my first corruption trial. I dressed Ruby in her favorite butterfly dress, tied her hair with a yellow ribbon, and packed her small backpack with snacks, water, and the sheet of song lyrics she'd insisted on bringing. I double-checked the camera. The battery was full. The lens was clean. The memory card 64 gigs was ready to record. We pulled into my parents' long brick driveway at exactly 11:04 a.m. Daniel's SUV was already parked beside the garage, its freshly waxed surface gleaming like a warning sign. I felt Ruby's excitement vibrating from the passenger seat. "Do you think they'll have cake with strawberries?" she asked, her eyes wide. "I'm sure they will," I said, swallowing my nerves. I wasn't doing this for them. I was doing it for her. My parents' garden looked exactly the same as it had my entire life, perfect hedges, Stone path, glassy lawn with not a single weed in sight. White tents had been set up near the patio, and a long buffet table was already laid out with champagne flutes, tiny sandwiches, and crudités no child would touch. My mother appeared from the back patio wearing pearls and a powder blue dress. She looked like someone hosting a charity luncheon, not a birthday party for her husband. "Elena," she said, embracing me lightly, her lips grazing my cheek with the precision of someone avoiding smudging her lipstick. "You look, well, and Ruby." Her tone lifted with a practiced brightness. "What a big girl you've become." Ruby smiled shyly and extended her arms for a hug, which my mother accepted, albeit awkwardly, patting her back like she was a fragile vase. Inside, my father was holding court as always, standing near the fireplace with Daniel and several of his golf buddies. He wore his usual smug grin, sipping brandy from a crystal tumbler despite the early hour. Daniel turned when he saw us and raised a hand. Well, if it isn't the prodigal sister," he said with mock affection. "And this must be the nightingale herself." Ruby beamed, unaware of the sarcasm. "I'm going to sing for Grandpa," she said proudly. Daniel chuckled. "Oh, I bet you are." I tensed. The comments were subtle dismissive in a way that adults could excuse, but children absorbed like poison. I knew this game. I'd played it my entire life, only this time, I wasn't playing. I was watching, recording. We made small talk. My mother offered me a mimosa, which I declined. Daniel bragged about a recent school board appointment. My father called Ruby spirited, then added, just like her mother, God help us. We moved outside after a while, guests mingling under the tents, paper fans fluttering, clinks of glass and careful laughter. Ruby played with some cousins near the patio steps, singing to herself under her breath. I spotted the lantern camera across the lawn and nodded to myself. Still intact, still capturing everything. I spoke briefly with Aunt Linda and my cousin Julian, both of whom seemed genuinely pleased to see me. Julian complimented Ruby's dress. Linda asked about my latest article. For a moment, I felt almost normal. Then came the lunch speeches. Daniel spoke first. Of course. His tribute to our father was filled with buzzwords, legacy, strength, discipline, tradition. He made a joke about me being the rebellious one in the family, to which everyone politely chuckled. I felt my stomach turn. Then my mother tapped her glass and announced, "Ruby has prepared a special song for her grandfather." All eyes turned to my daughter. Ruby's face lit up. She stepped forward, standing a few feet from my father's chair, holding her paper with both hands. She cleared her throat and began to sing. It was a simple melody, something from her second-grade music class, but her voice clear, soft, unwavering, carried across the yard with the kind of sincerity that made grown men misty-eyed at school recitals. Except not here. Here. I watched my father shift uncomfortably. Daniel narrowed his eyes. My mother smiled thinly. Ruby sang through the first verse, her small voice growing stronger with each line. She swayed a little with the rhythm, her hands clutched the page, but her eyes shone. And then Daniel moved. He stood, walked across the grass, and approached Ruby mid-song. I stood too, immediately alert. "Daniel," I said quietly, "let her finish." He ignored me. Ruby faltered as he approached, her voice dipping. "You've had your moment," he said lowly, reaching out and snatching the paper from her hands. "Hey!" I shouted, taking a step forward, and then so fast I almost missed it. His hand swung and connected with her cheek. A hush fell over the crowd. Ruby gasped and stepped back. Stunned, I ran. I scooped her into my arms, cradling her against my chest. "It's okay," I whispered over and over, though my own heart was racing. My father stayed seated, swirling his drink. "She needed to learn some manners," he said. My mother adjusted the pearl clasp at her neck. Honestly, Elena, you overreact to everything. Daniel looked smug, like he'd done me a favor. That was when I stopped shaking. I stood, Ruby still in my arms, and looked at every single person in the yard. I want you all to remember this moment, I said coldly, because I will. And then I walked away. No screaming, no threats. But I knew what was waiting for me back at home. The footage, the truth. And this time, I had no intention of letting it stay buried. We drove home in silence. Ruby sat in the back seat with her cheek pressed to the window, her butterfly dress wrinkled, the yellow ribbon in her hair drooping slightly. The welt on her cheek had faded to a pink flush, but her usual spark, her curiosity, her chatter, her humming was gone. She didn't ask to play music. She didn't ask why Daniel had hit her. She didn't say a word, and I didn't push her. Some hurts settle deeper than language can reach. I knew that all too well. When we arrived at our apartment, I carried her upstairs even though she was perfectly capable of walking. She clung to me tightly, burying her face into my neck. I set her on the couch and fetched an ice pack from the freezer. Her skin flinched as it touched her cheek, but she didn't complain. "Do you want some juice?" I asked. She nodded. As I poured it, my hands trembled not just from the memory of the slap, but from everything that came after. The silence of the guests, the way no one intervened, the way my father smirked, and my mother defended Daniel as if this was some misunderstanding, as if Ruby was the one out of line. That was the part that stunned me most. The quiet, the enabling, the same thing that had been happening all my life, only now. It had happened to my daughter. And I realized in that moment they weren't going to stop. Not unless I made them. That evening, after Ruby fell asleep still without singing a single note, I took out the camera's SD card and loaded the footage onto my laptop. My hands were steady now, fueled by something deeper than rage resolve. I watched the whole event play out from a wide angle, the speeches, the patio, Ruby's song. The moment Daniel stood, his stride, his hand, the slap landed with horrifying clarity. I watched my father's reaction indifferent, my mother's mild annoyance, then me rushing to Ruby, shielding her. My voice, sharp and breaking. My exit, silent but firm. I watched it 3 times. Then I cut the footage, not doctored, not edited deceptively. Just the raw facts trimmed to the essential truth. The slap, the comments, the crowd's stillness. I uploaded it to a secure cloud drive and sent a backup to an encrypted folder. Then I called someone I hadn't spoken to in nearly a year, Lauren Wexler, an old editor and friend from my investigative reporting days. She picked up on the second ring. "Elena, I have a story," I said. There was a pause. "A story, or your story, both," I replied. Over the next hour, I walked her through everything. Not just what happened at the party, but the years of gaslighting, neglect, double standards, the subtle erasures, the invisible bruises, the generational script that excused cruelty as structure and control as care. I could feel Lauren listening carefully. At one point, she murmured, "God, I remember how you used to talk about your brother back in college. I thought maybe you were exaggerating." "I wasn't," I said. "But even if I had been, it doesn't matter anymore. I have it on tape. You want to go public?" I hesitated. "I want to make sure he can never do this again," I said finally. "Not to Ruby, not to his students, not to anyone." She understood. We agreed to co-write the story under my name, full disclosure. No anonymity, no hiding. Lauren would help me with structure and distribution, but it would be my voice telling it, my truth. But that was just the beginning. The next day, I kept Ruby home from school. I called her pediatrician, Dr. Sanchez, and brought her in for a formal assessment. Dr. Sanchez was gentle and thorough, documenting the bruise, taking notes on Ruby's withdrawn demeanor, and referring us to a child therapist with trauma experience. She's not talking much, I explained as Ruby sat quietly in the corner with a coloring book. She usually sings constantly. Now she won't even hum. Dr. Sanchez gave me a sad, knowing look. Children are resilient, Elena, but only when they know they're safe. You're doing the right thing. I nodded, but the words didn't land. Not yet. I called my building's lawyer next, explained what had happened, asked about next steps if I needed to file a restraining order or pursue legal action. He listened carefully, took notes, and then said, "If you have video, you're already in a much stronger position than most parents in these situations. But be prepared when you move against family. It never stays clean." "I'm not looking for clean," I said. "I'm looking for consequences." That evening, I received the first text. "Daniel, you're really going to blow this out of proportion." "Huh. Then you always were the dramatic one. Then I was disciplining her, not assaulting her. Maybe if you weren't such a pushover, she wouldn't be such a brat." I didn't respond. An hour later, my mother called. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice, smooth and brittle. "Elena, I hope you're not planning to make a scene out of this. Families forgive. That's what families do. Your daughter is fine. Let's all move on." Then my father, via email, "If you pursue this vendetta, don't expect further financial assistance. You've always struggled to stay afloat. Don't bite the hand that feeds you." That was the moment I laughed. For the first time in days, I actually laughed because they thought money would make me back down. They didn't realize I had already done the math. Freedom was more valuable. Ruby's safety was priceless. And their approval had expired years ago. By midnight, I had finished the first draft of the article with Lauren. The headline was clear: "When my brother slapped my daughter for singing." My parents laughed. "Here's why I'm not staying silent. We plan to publish on Medium, then syndicate to parenting blogs and survivor forums." Lauren would pitch it to a few national outlets as well, not for virality, but to give it weight, so it couldn't be ignored or dismissed. But before publishing, I needed one more thing. I drafted 3 emails. One to the school board where Daniel worked, one to the Parent-Teacher Association where he volunteered, one to his principal. Each one included a link to the video, a brief summary of the event, and my contact information for verification. No accusations, no threats, just the facts. I hit send, and for the first time since Ruby was born, I felt like I had taken my power back, not just as a mother, but as a daughter, a sister, and a woman whose voice had been ignored far too long. Now, it was their turn to listen. The first response came 12 hours after I sent the emails. It wasn't from Daniel. It wasn't from my parents. It was from the principal of Ridgeview Charter School, where Daniel taught history and coached the debate team. The subject line read, "Reconcerning allegation regarding Daniel Carter." The body of the message was brief but formal. They had received the materials. They were reviewing the footage and assessing next steps. They take student welfare seriously and would contact me for further discussion if needed. That was it. But it was enough. I stared at the email for a long time, then forwarded it to Lauren. She replied immediately. It begins. 2 days later, the article went live. Lauren's platform on Medium had over 120,000 subscribers. But more than that, the title struck a nerve. Within an hour, the piece had been shared over 300 times. By lunch, it was nearing 5,000. By dinner, 17,000. The video clip embedded in the article had been viewed more than 200,000 times in under 24 hours. The internet was awake. I didn't check the comments, but Lauren did. She filtered out the vitriol and sent me screenshots of the ones that mattered. This made me sob. I was Ruby once. We call it discipline to justify abuse. Thank you for telling the truth. I needed to read this. I've stayed silent about my brother for 10 years. By the end of the week, Ridgeview suspended Daniel with pay, pending investigation. It wasn't justice, but it was movement. The silence from my family, however, was short-lived. On Thursday, I received a voicemail from my father. The tone was clipped and cold. I hope you're proud of yourself. Your brother is humiliated. Your mother hasn't slept in 2 nights. We're being hounded by reporters. Your stunt has caused irreparable damage. Then the kicker, if you have any decency left, you'll take it down. No apology, no recognition of harm, just the expectation still that I would fall back in line. I didn't respond. Then, the doorbell rang. It was Paul, my cousin on my mother's side, someone I hadn't seen since Ruby was a baby. He looked nervous, holding a small cardboard box. I just wanted you to have this. He said, it's something you should hear. He handed me the box and left without further explanation. Inside was an old digital recorder and 3 unlabeled USB drives. That night, after Ruby went to sleep, I played the first file. It was audio from a Christmas years ago, maybe 2015. I heard my own voice, tense, asking Daniel to stop mocking me in front of the cousins. I heard Daniel's laugh, then a slap, then silence. Another file, my father shouting about discipline after I had dared disagree with him over dinner. Another, my mother sobbing about how Elena always ruins everything. Paul had kept them. He had recorded things secretly, cautiously over the years. And now, after reading my article, he had finally decided to act. On Saturday, my phone rang again. This time it was Natalie, Daniel's wife. I didn't pick up. She left a voicemail instead. Elena. I listened to the recording. I watched the video. I knew Daniel could be cruel, but I didn't know this. I'm so sorry. If you ever want to talk about Ruby, about anything, I'm here. The next morning, she filed for legal separation. It was in the news by Monday. Meanwhile, Ruby was changing slowly. Her cheek had healed physically, but she was quiet, withdrawn. She no longer hummed in the mornings. She barely touched her music books. At night, she asked if we could leave the hallway light on. Are we safe? She whispered once, after a nightmare. We are now, I told her. But safety, I realized, wasn't just about locking the doors. It was about belief in her, in me, in the truth. So I took her to see Dr. Megan Rowe, a trauma-informed child therapist who specialized in early intervention. Ruby was hesitant at first, but by the second session, she began to speak. She said the song was too loud. Ruby confessed. Uncle Daniel said I was rude. I thought maybe I was. Dr. Rowe was calm and reassuring. She explained to Ruby and to me that trauma doesn't always look like a scream. Sometimes it's a child no longer singing. We agreed on weekly sessions. Ruby even agreed to start drawing again. Then came the backlash. A small but vocal group of distant family members began sending messages. One aunt emailed to say I was airing dirty laundry for attention. A cousin accused me of exaggerating what had happened. Another warned I had made enemies in powerful places. I blocked them all, but their voices echoed. Because those were the same messages I had internalized my whole life. Too loud, too much, too sensitive, too dramatic. They weren't just mad about the article. They were mad that I broke the script. But something else happened too. Emails, dozens of them. Then hundreds, not from trolls but from strangers. From women in Idaho and grandfathers in Kansas. From teenagers, from teachers, from therapists, from mothers. My father slapped me once for singing. I stopped for 10 years. I left my family after they said my daughter was too emotional. Your story helped me feel less alone. Thank you. You helped me realize it wasn't my fault. It overwhelmed me, but it also fueled me because this was no longer about my family. It was about how many people carried bruises no one had ever believed. At the end of the week, I got a letter in the mail. It was handwritten, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. You've always needed to be the center of attention. Now you've ruined your brother's life and embarrassed this family. I hope you're happy. It wasn't signed, but I knew my mother's handwriting. I held the letter over the sink, watched it catch fire, watched the ashes drift down like black snow. That night, Ruby asked if she could sleep in my bed. She curled beside me, her head resting on my shoulder. "Mom," she whispered, "if I sing again, will he come back?" My throat tightened. "No," I said, "he won't. And even if he tried, I'd stop him." She was quiet. "Then will you sing with me?" Just a little, I nodded, and we did. A small, trembling version of the same song that had caused so much chaos, but this time in the dark, in the safety of our home. It was just ours. No shame, no fear. Just the beginning of a new melody. I hadn't planned to attend the school board hearing. But then Ruby had another nightmare. She sat bolt upright in bed at 2:18 a.m. Drenched in sweat, her voice hoarse from screaming. "He's coming again," she sobbed, clutching at my shirt. "He's mad because I sang." That night, as I held her and whispered reassurances I wasn't sure I believed, something inside me hardened. The kind of resolve that doesn't scream. It sharpens like glass. This wasn't just about my brother's slap. It was about the shame he planted with it, shame that was trying to take root in Ruby. And I refused to let that happen. So when Ridgeview Charter emailed me a week later, requesting my presence for Daniel's disciplinary hearing, I said yes. The board meeting was scheduled for a Thursday morning. It was held in a modest municipal building, in a beige conference room that smelled faintly of disinfectant and worn carpet. I wore navy slacks, a simple blouse, and tied my hair back. No makeup, no dramatics, just clarity. Daniel sat at the far end of the room beside his union representative. He looked thinner, hollow-eyed. His blazer was wrinkled. For a moment, I might have felt sorry for him, but then I remembered Ruby's voice shaking with fear. And I didn't. The board consisted of 5 members, 3 women, 2 men. The chair, Ms. Hernandez, introduced the hearing as a review of an off-campus incident involving a member of staff, as submitted by a parent with documented evidence. She turned to me. "Ms. Carter, you have the floor." I stood. I didn't start with the slap. I started with a song. 7 days ago, my daughter sang a simple children's tune at a family gathering. She's 7. Her name is Ruby. She loves butterflies, waffles, and music, especially music. It's how she expresses joy. I paused. That joy was interrupted when my brother, Daniel Carter, your employee, walked across a yard filled with family members and slapped her across the face for singing too loudly. A collective breath from the room. I pulled a flash drive from my purse and handed it to the AV technician. Before I say anything else, I want you to see and hear what happened. The video played. The slap rang out like a gunshot in that silent room. When it ended, no one said a word. Then I spoke. "I'm not here to vilify my brother. I'm here because people need to stop pretending that violence cloaked in family or discipline is somehow acceptable. He didn't act like a concerned uncle. He acted like a man who expected no consequences. And until now, he's never had any..." Miss Hernandez cleared her throat gently. "Miss Carter, I want to thank you for your courage. We'll deliberate and follow up within the next 48 hours. As I gathered my things to leave, Daniel stood up abruptly. "This is absurd," he snapped. "She's been out to get me for years." I turned to him. "I didn't record your hand." Daniel, you did. I didn't choose your words. You did. He glared at me, and for a flicker of a second, I saw the mask fall. Behind it was not regret, just fury at being seen. 2 days later, Ridgeview released a statement. Daniel was placed on indefinite unpaid suspension, pending final termination review. They also launched a full review of his conduct with students. The press picked up the story almost immediately. Within 48 hours, the article had spread beyond parenting circles and was picked up by a major national outlet. They didn't name Ruby, but they quoted my words. They embedded the footage. The headline read, "Mother's hidden camera exposes educator's assault of 7-year-old during family party." I watched the view count rise. A producer from a morning show emailed. A podcast requested an interview. A local parenting forum invited me to speak at an upcoming conference. I declined them all. This wasn't about going viral. It was about Ruby and what she deserved. The week after the hearing, Natalie called again. We met at a small coffee shop near her sister's apartment. She looked better, less hollow. Still tired, but no longer like she was bracing for impact every time someone opened a door. "I filed for divorce," she said, stirring her tea slowly. I thought, maybe I could fix him. Maybe if I just kept the peace, he'd learn. But then I heard him talk to Ruby, and it was like hearing our whole marriage compressed into one moment. I nodded. "You don't have to explain. I get it." She reached across the table and touched my hand. "I'm sorry for not speaking up sooner." "You did now," I said quietly. "That's what matters." She told me that Daniel had thrown a chair when he found out she'd moved out. That he blamed me, blamed her, blamed the internet. He still thinks none of this is his fault. She said, "That you're just punishing him for being the golden boy?" I almost laughed. He was the golden boy. He just forgot the shine was built on silence. Natalie's eyes welled with tears. "I wish we'd had kids, but now I'm grateful we didn't." Back at home, Ruby had started to sing again. Not loudly, not in public, but soft little tunes while brushing her teeth, humming during story time. One afternoon, I caught her drawing a picture of herself singing on a stage. "It's me," she said, "when I'm not scared anymore." I hung the drawing on our fridge. It was better than any headline. Then, one morning, I received a certified letter in the mail. From my parents. The envelope was thick, legal-looking. Inside was a cease and desist order, accusing me of defamation, emotional harm, and endangering family unity. They demanded I take down the article, retract my statements, and issue a public apology. They claimed I was delusional and out for revenge. I handed it to my lawyer. She laughed. "They clearly haven't read the defamation statutes." "Let them sue me," I said. "Then we can subpoena every single thing." Instead, we filed a restraining order to protect Ruby from Daniel, from my parents, from their denial. The judge approved it. The next domino fell quietly. Daniel's teacher's license was suspended pending investigation. Anonymous reports from students trickled in. One described being grabbed by the arm and yelled at. Another said he was told girls should know when to be quiet. Patterns emerged. The school launched a wider inquiry. And then, unexpectedly, my grandmother called. I read the article. She said, "Took me 3 days. But I read every word. I didn't know what to say. I'm sorry." She continued, "I didn't know it had gotten so bad. I thought we were just keeping peace. Peace isn't silence." I replied, "It's safety." She invited me to tea. When we met, she told me stories I'd never heard. How Daniel had been allowed to speak to adults like he was one of them from the time he was 10. How I was always told to let him have the spotlight. How my mother, her daughter, had been raised not to cry ever. How my father had once said, "Girls need to learn quiet if they want to be respected. This family," my grandmother said, "has spent generations mistaking obedience for love." I nodded. "That stops now." She looked me in the eye. You did something I couldn't. You broke it. You protected her. For the first time, I felt the weight shift. Ruby's therapist, Dr. Rowe, called me after one of their sessions. She's healing beautifully, she said, still cautious, but her confidence is returning. She even brought in a new song, that night. Ruby climbed onto the couch beside me. Mom! Yes, love, can we make a video of my song? Just for us, I smiled. We can make a whole concert if you want. She grinned. Okay, but no one's allowed to hit me if I sing too loud. I took her hands in mine. No one will ever hit you again. Not while I'm breathing. She nodded solemnly. Promise, promise. And so we did it. We recorded her singing clear, strong, brave right there in our living room, a tiny voice reclaiming her right to exist in full volume. When she finished, she bowed dramatically. I clapped, tears running down my cheeks. That night, as I watched her sleep, I realized something. This wasn't just justice. It was freedom. Freedom from the family rules that told me I was too much. Freedom from the fear that Ruby would grow up silenced like I had. Freedom from the lie that being quiet equals being good. Ruby would grow up knowing that her voice was beautiful, and I would never again let anyone take it from her. The article had been live for almost a month. The media frenzy had slowed, the messages of support had thinned to a manageable stream, and Daniel had faded from the headlines. But healing, I was learning, doesn't follow news cycles. It works on its own quiet timeline, gritty, uncertain, and often invisible to the outside world. Ruby still asked me to check the locks every night, still jumped when a loud voice echoed in public spaces, but she sang more now quietly, confidently. Her therapist said she was rebuilding trust, with you, with the world, and with herself. As for me, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired, the kind of tired that doesn't go away with sleep. I'd exposed the truth. But the damage had already taken root long before the slap. I saw it now in the way I still second-guessed myself in emails, still braced for disapproval, still flinched at the sound of my father's name. That's what trauma does. It rewires you. And yet, there was something liberating in the aftermath. No more pretending. No more making excuses for people who never made space for me. No more trying to be the daughter they'd accept. I didn't want their acceptance anymore. I wanted something real. My apartment had become a sanctuary. On weekends, Ruby and I cooked pancakes in pajamas, danced to vintage pop songs, and made up stories about magical foxes and talking trees. She joined a small children's choir at the community center, one led by Mrs. Joanna, a soft-spoken music teacher who welcomed Ruby with open arms and no judgment. At first, Ruby stood in the back. She mouthed the words more than she sang them, but over time, her voice crept forward note by note, breath by breath. She's starting to own her sound again. Ms. Joanna told me one afternoon, "You gave her that space." I smiled, swallowing the knot in my throat. Thank you for giving her a place to use it. Then something I never expected happened. One by one, members of the Carter family began to reach out, not with rage, not with denial, but with something closer to reckoning. My cousin Julia sent a long email. She confessed that she had always noticed how differently I was treated, that she'd seen my father humiliate me at her wedding rehearsal when I asked for 5 minutes to gather myself before giving a speech. I didn't say anything then. She wrote, "But I want to now. I'm sorry. You weren't crazy. You were brave." Then came Aunt Margaret, who called me out of the blue and spoke in a quivering voice. "I remember when your mother told me you were too sensitive because you cried when Daniel broke your science project. I didn't say anything then, but I wish I had. The trickle became a stream. Stories, confessions, apologies. Some from relatives who had seen Daniel lash out at their own children. Others who had grown up under the same cold gaze of my grandfather and knew exactly how shame was passed down like an heirloom. We thought it was just how things were. They said, but now because of Ruby, because of me, they were seeing it clearly. I even received a letter from Natalie's sister, Marissa. I used to think Natalie was exaggerating. She wrote, but after your story, she opened up to us. About the yelling, the threats, the way she stopped laughing around him. She ended the letter with, "Thank you for showing her it's okay to leave." The ripple effect was real. Not flashy, not viral, but powerful. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving the Carter legacy, I was rewriting it. Still, some relationships remained unchanged. My parents hadn't contacted me since the cease and desist letter. Daniel, as far as I knew, was living with a friend outside the city. His teaching license was under review. His name had disappeared from the school website. The PTA meetings he once led now included a new volunteer coordinator. His name was whispered with discomfort, followed by phrases like pending review, disciplinary action, or simply, that article. He hadn't apologized. I doubted he ever would. But that was no longer my concern. I wasn't doing this for his apology. I was doing it for Ruby's future and my own. One afternoon, while walking home from the community center, Ruby turned to me. "Mom." "Yeah, sweetheart. Do you think I was loud that day at Grandpa's party?" I stopped walking, kneeling beside her. I looked her square in the eyes. "You were singing." I said, "Singing isn't loud. Singing is brave." She thought for a moment, then nodded. "Okay," she said. "Then I'm going to sing every day." And she did. That night, she stood on the coffee table with a hairbrush in hand and sang her little heart out. Off-key, off-beat, full of joy. I clapped until my hands hurt. The next week, the director of the community center asked if I would be willing to give a talk to a group of parents navigating generational trauma and complicated family histories. "We read your story," she said, "and some of us really needed it. Would you be open to sharing more?" I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to help, but because I still didn't know how to define myself. Was I a whistleblower? A survivor? A mother who'd had enough? But then I looked at Ruby coloring at the dining table, humming softly, and I knew I was a cycle breaker, and that was worth sharing. So I said yes. And a month later, I stood in a modest multipurpose room with 30 chairs and fluorescent lights. A small group of parents, mostly women. A few men listened as I told the story. Not just of the slap, but of the silence before it, and the voice I found after it. Some cried, some nodded, some stayed behind after to talk, to hug, to share stories of their own. "I haven't talked to my mother in 2 years. One woman said, I always wondered if I was being cruel. But after hearing you, I think I was just choosing peace." Another told me, "I let my daughter quit piano after her grandfather said she was showing off. I wish I'd stopped him then." We weren't just talking about violence. We were talking about voice, and what it meant to grow up in a house where yours didn't matter. That night, I walked home lighter, because pain shared is pain divided, and truth shared is a torch passed forward. Back home, Ruby was already in bed, Ms. Joanna had stayed to watch her and left a note she sang the whole time. Loud, joyful, free. That word free lingered with me, because freedom wasn't just leaving a toxic house. It was staying gone. It was building something better. It was realizing that the opposite of silence isn't just noise, it's choice. Fall arrived quietly. The leaves along our street blushed golden red. The air smelled of apples and cinnamon and something else, something lighter, freer, like breathing without flinching. Ruby had adjusted to second grade beautifully. She joined the school's art club and had made fast friends with a pair of twin girls who shared her love of musicals. Every morning, she left the house with her backpack bouncing and her voice humming something cheerful. Every morning, I felt a quiet gratitude that bordered on awe. The little girl who once whispered, "Was I bad for singing?" now twirled down sidewalks and sang her own lyrics to made-up songs about cats on scooters and cupcakes that could talk. It wasn't just healing, it was reclamation. And as for me, I had started to rebuild in my own way, too. Lauren and I began outlining a longer piece, a memoir hybrid, part investigative journalism, part personal testimony. We pitched the proposal to a few agents, and to our surprise, several responded with enthusiasm, but that wasn't the part that mattered most. What mattered was that for the first time, I was writing without hiding. No more softening the edges, no more skipping over the parts that made people uncomfortable. I was telling the story as it was and as it needed to be told. And then, one chilly Saturday afternoon, Ruby tugged at my sleeve and whispered, "Can we have a concert? A concert in our house? For everyone we love." She looked up at me with those big, insistent eyes. Like a celebration. A celebration of what? She shrugged, then said, "Of singing again. We planned it together." Ruby made the invitations with crayons and glitter. I baked cinnamon muffins and laid out folding chairs in our living room. We strung fairy lights across the ceiling and taped paper butterflies to the windows. We called it the Chosen Family Concert. The guest list wasn't long, but it was right. Tara came. Of course. She brought juice boxes and gave Ruby a handmade crown that read Queen of Courage. Miss Joanna arrived with her own daughter and a ukulele. Paul showed up too, sheepish but sincere, carrying a small stuffed fox for Ruby and a bottle of wine for me. He hugged me longer than expected and whispered, "Thank you for giving us all permission to speak." Natalie came without Daniel. Of course. She looked brighter, more open. She told me she'd enrolled in a certification program to become a school counselor. "I want to help kids who don't know how to name what's happening at home," she said, "before it becomes their whole personality. Even my grandmother made it, cane and all, with a plate of cookies and a stiff hug. I may not have gotten it right with my children," she said quietly. "But I see now how much damage silence did. You broke the curse. Elena, you did." I smiled and said nothing, because sometimes the quietest acknowledgments are the loudest. When it was time for the concert, Ruby stood by the window, her little face lit by sunlight. She held a plastic microphone in one hand and adjusted her crown with the other. "I wrote this song with Ms. Joanna," she said proudly. "It's about being loud and not being sorry." Everyone chuckled, a mix of warmth and surprise. She sang. Her voice wasn't perfect. It cracked on some notes and raced on others. But it was full, unapologetic, radiant. I didn't cry during the song. I waited until after. When she finished, the room exploded in applause. Ruby grinned and curtsied like a Broadway star. Then she ran to me and whispered, "I wasn't scared," and that's when I cried. Later, after the guests had gone and Ruby had fallen asleep in a blanket nest on the couch, I sat on the balcony with Tara and Paul. The air was cool, the city quiet. Paul was the first to speak. "You know, when I gave you those recordings, I was scared. Not just of the family's reaction, but of what it meant to stop protecting the version of us we always sold to the world." "I know," I said. "It's terrifying to admit what was real." He nodded. "But freeing, too." Tara raised her glass, to the end of pretending. We clinked glasses, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't carrying the weight alone. 2 days later, I received a letter in the mail. A real one. Handwritten. Unsealed. It was from my mother. I hesitated before opening it. I'd prepared myself for more denial, more blame, but it was short and different. Elena, I don't know how to fix what I allowed. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed you to know. I watched the video again, and I cried this time. Not for Daniel, for you, for Ruby, for what I didn't protect you from, and what I almost let happen again. Thank you for stopping it. Mom. There was no return address, no phone number, just words. But for now, that was enough. A week later, I met with Ruby's therapist, Dr. Rowe, for a check-in. She's doing incredibly well. She said, her drawings are vibrant. She's engaging with peers, and she's reclaiming control through her singing, which, in her case, is her identity. She still flinches sometimes. I admitted she might for a while. Dr. Rowe replied gently, but the difference is now she knows she has a place to land. I nodded slowly. She does. That night, as I tucked Ruby into bed, she reached up and touched my face. Mom, yes, sweetheart, are we a real family? Even if it's just us, I smiled. The realest kind. She thought for a second. Because we don't hurt each other, because we listen. I said, and we choose each other every single day. She closed her eyes and whispered, good. Then she rolled over and began humming, softly, freely. The kind of sound that once shattered a family's illusion, and now it was building something stronger in its place. 6 months passed. The seasons shifted again, leaves fell. Snow came and melted, and suddenly spring pushed through the soil. Tulips bloomed on the windowsill of our apartment. Ruby turned 8. She requested an outdoor birthday picnic with chocolate cupcakes and a stage made of painted cardboard so she could sing her new favorite song, one she wrote herself, the night before her party. As I tucked her in, she said, you know what I'm most proud of, Mom? What's that? That I kept my voice. I didn't cry. I just kissed her forehead and whispered, me too. Her birthday was perfect. The sun held steady. Her choir friends came. Tara brought a speaker and cupcakes. Paul arrived early to help set up. And Ms. Joanna came with a basket of sheet music and party hats. Even Natalie came with her new partner, a kind woman who worked as a school nurse. They brought Ruby a music journal wrapped in lavender paper. Ruby hugged them both without hesitation. And then, to everyone's surprise, my grandmother arrived slow, steady, leaning on her cane, holding a folded note in her hand. She handed it to me silently, then walked over to Ruby and gave her a book of poems and a kiss on the cheek. I opened the note later. It read, we taught you to be small because that's all we knew. You taught us how wrong we were. I'm listening now. Grandma Mabel the next week. I was invited to speak at a university panel on journalism, ethics, and personal storytelling. I almost declined, fearful that standing in front of strangers would feel like exposure, not power. But Ruby looked up at me and said, will you tell them the story where I sing and everything changes? So I went. I spoke about family silence, the courage of one voice, and the cost of breaking generational patterns. I told them about Ruby, about Daniel, about the slap that wasn't just a slap. It was the culmination of decades of denial. I didn't dramatize it. I just told the truth. And when I finished, the room was quiet in that reverent way, the kind where people aren't sure whether to clap or cry. A student raised her hand. How did you know you were doing the right thing? I paused. I didn't. I said, I was terrified the whole time. But then I looked at my daughter's face and I knew I couldn't let her grow up thinking silence was safer than being heard. That night, I received a message from one of the attendees. It said simply, I recorded my father yelling at my little sister tonight, and I told my mom we're leaving. Thank you. Later that spring. Ruby's choir held a small recital. She wore a light blue dress and white sneakers. She stood in the center of the stage, taller now, more certain. She held the microphone with both hands and sang a soft, steady version of "You've Got a Friend." I sat in the front row with tears sliding down my cheeks, not because she was perfect, but because she was herself, full voice, no apology. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. I stood, clapping harder than anyone, and she beamed. Afterward, she ran to me and said, "I wasn't even nervous, I said, laughing through my tears. She squeezed my hand. "But you still came. Always." I said, "Always." We still had boundaries with the rest of the Carter family. Some relatives never reached out again. My parents hadn't spoken to me since the letter. Daniel had reportedly moved to another city and taken a job outside education. I no longer checked on him. I didn't Google him. He belonged to a part of the past I no longer served. But the healing didn't require his remorse. It required my refusal to stay quiet. People often assume that justice is loud, that it's flashing lights, courtrooms, big moments. But sometimes justice is a quiet girl in a butterfly dress singing again. Sometimes it's a mother choosing peace over performance. Sometimes it's a small circle of people clapping in a living room while a child twirls and laughs and trusts. That's what justice looked like for us, not a courtroom. A concert. One evening, I stood at the kitchen sink as Ruby worked on a school project nearby. The windows were open, the smell of spring carried in. She was humming again, something new, soft and hopeful. I watched her, and I thought, this is the legacy I want. Not silence, not suffering, not shame disguised as discipline, but joy, voice, choice. As the light faded, Ruby looked up and asked, "What's our family motto?" I smiled. "We don't have one." She grinned. "We should." I wiped my hands on a towel and sat beside her. "Okay," I said. "What should it be?" she thought, then said, "We speak, we sing, we stay." I stared at her, heart full, and I said, "That's perfect. We speak, we sing, we stay. That's what Ruby taught me. That's what I will carry. That's the voice that stayed."